Welcome back, everyone. We've got two terrific keynotes today. That's one of the huge benefits, by the way, of having a virtual incident response forum, is that we can have two keynotes. We don't have to have lunch. Go have your lunch, bring it back, and watch us all as things are going on. So we have two fantastic, for our first keynote, I'm very thrilled about this one because we haven't heard from this person very often because he's pretty much brand new on the job. His name is Justin Shibayama Herring, and he's Executive Deputy Superintendent of the Cybersecurity Division of the New York State Department of Financial Services, which is a mouthful. And I think what makes this panel, this keynote so interesting is that we can really sort of figure out so many different things about how a financial entity is regulated. It's very complicated. There are so many different regulators. Even within New York State, there are different state regulators. Justin leads this new division, which most of us really know little or nothing about because it's the first of its kind. And it's focused on protecting consumers and the industry from cyber threats. They do examinations, investigations, education, just like any other civil administrative agency, but theirs is in New York. We all want to know how his office is going to impact the financial sector. Will there be change? Will cybersecurity expectations rise? Will his office be a bit more forgiving with everyone now working from home? Hopefully we can learn that today. Justin's really got an incredible background. He's not at all new to cyber. He was chief of the cyber unit at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland, and then he moved to New Jersey where he supervised a slew of prosecutions of just about every kind of cyber crime, including against Silk Road, which started as an old-fashioned drug bust, and then it turned out that the defendant confessed to selling online in Silk Road. He's one of a few prosecutors we have today who worked on Silk Road. What Justin did when he was at Baltimore, which was for almost 5 years, and New Jersey for just about 5 years, was he was what's called the CHIP. And every U.S. attorney's office has a CHIP, a computer hacking and intellectual property attorney. And a lot of those former CHIPs have now spoken at the forum. And these are really specialized, a new breed of prosecutor that specializes in technology-related crimes. So to think that New York was able to get him after getting probably more criminal prosecutorial experience in cyber than just about anyone else on the state, because most CHIPs are really not there for as long as that, and most CHIPs have not worked as that in two different jurisdictions. And rather than have Justin just give a speech, he's such an interesting guy with so much to talk about. We continued our tradition here where he'll be interviewed and the audience can submit questions as well. Welcome, Justin. I know you're in New York City. Are you doing okay?
I am, John. Thanks for having me. I think I'm doing as well as anyone can be in New York under the circumstances right now.
I'm sure. Well, thank you so much for being here. Interviewing you, we have the perfect person, Justin, because it's someone who truly understands what you do. His name is Ken Josephs, and he's from Duff & Phelps, a managing director there, and he's head of their disputes consulting practice. I know Ken because he's a former colleague of mine from the SEC. And what makes him so uniquely qualified today is that unlike every single SEC, meaning the Securities and Exchange Commission, unlike every single one that you'll ever meet, Ken actually has two specialties. He worked in the Office of Compliance Inspections and Examinations, conducting audits of financial firms, investment advisors, broker-dealers, mutual funds, other regulated entities by the SEC. And he did that as a senior officer. And then he was in the Division of Enforcement as the co-chief of the Asset Management Specialized Unit. And that's a very special position. There are 6 specialized units at the SEC. And the leaders of those are very special people leading really some very, very important cases at the SEC. So Ken was a senior guy in enforcement, a senior guy in examinations, and with those multiple levels of experience, really comes to us was the perfect person to have you. So welcome, Ken. I hope all's well for you. You're in New York City also, correct?
I am, John, and just like Justin, doing as best we can under the circumstances. It's a very serious environment and people are losing their lives, so we're thankful daily.
All right, well, let's take a diversion from that and hear what Justin is all about. I've had a lot of people tell me they want to hear this keynote, so please get to it, and I'll go to the next room, prepare the next keynote speakers.
All right, thank you, John. It's truly an honor to moderate the keynote with somebody of Justin's caliber today. I couldn't think of a more informed perspective than what we're about to learn from Justin, who, as John mentioned, is the current head of the NYDFS's Cybersecurity Division. Justin, thank you for honoring with your insights. As we mentioned, our nation is navigating through unprecedented times as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, which, as you know, is having a devastating impact in many sectors of our economy. What's the role of the DFS in this situation?
Thanks, Ken, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you. At DFS, as with I think many organizations in this time, we are really completely focused on the crisis that's been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. DFS has had a role to play across a lot of different areas. I mean, we regulate health insurance, we regulate the financial industry writ large, and so there's a tremendous amount of work happening at DFS right now, focused on basic questions like how do we make sure during this time of crisis that people aren't losing their health insurance, that they aren't losing their homes, that we're doing what we can to make sure the financial industry itself is able to weather this crisis. Institutions and companies can't get sick, but they can. But many of them are facing unprecedented challenges in terms of drops in revenue. There have been whole industries that have gone dark. And so at DFS, we're really in constant contact with our partners in industry, across the state government, and in the federal government and other states as well. Daily communication with them, daily communication within the leadership team at DFS to make sure that we're staying on top of the latest issues, the latest developments, and that everyone has the information they need to respond to that as quickly as possible. And again, I think this is probably true of most organizations. It's an all hands on deck type of moment. I myself have been contributing in projects that aren't directly cyber related, but have some sort of technology component. Because right now we're trying to get the job done as effectively as we can and as quickly as we can, given the urgent nature of a lot of these issues. In cyber specifically, I think I've been doing really a similar thing, a version of that, where I've been working with people in industry, talking to folks about the challenges they're seeing, about the threats that they're facing right now, and what the key risks are, and working on doing what we can do at DFS in this very difficult time to help the industry, to help consumers, to help New York State respond to this crisis.
Your role at DFS seems to encompass enforcement, policy, outreach, education, examination, a whole slew of different functions and tasks. Can you maybe just give some examples of some of the initiatives that you've run in the last year or so in each of these areas?
So I think you touched on one of the reasons why it's the division. I think the division is such an exciting place. It's really, in a lot of ways, a unique opportunity to use the different tools the DFS has across all the different industry segments that it regulates in focus of a single goal: to improve cybersecurity across the financial services industry. Some of the areas that we cover and that we've been focused on, for instance, are supervision and examination. The division has a group of specialist examiners, cybersecurity examiners, who handle many of the examinations across the board, whether it's a bank, insurance company, or something else. I'm also overseeing the incident notification process and the response and DFS's response to that. And we've been working to make sure that we're collecting the information we need, and that information is disseminated in a way that's useful within DFS and ultimately beyond DFS. Then there's enforcement as well. I think the cybersecurity regulation of DFS was really new at the time that it was implemented, and we were giving companies, I think, a lot of time to work on it, to understand the issues, and to try to get into compliance. That's still very much our attitude, but in those thankfully rare cases where there are significant issues of non-compliance, we have started to look at this from an enforcement perspective and open some enforcement cases. And then another piece of what I've been working on and what we're doing in the division is policy and guidance. So to take an example of a policy issue, cyber insurance, right? We're an insurance regulator, and I think that there's the cyber insurance market is growing, but it still has a long ways to go. So what we can do as a regulator, in coordination with regulators in the US and other countries, to help facilitate that market and make it more useful and more effective as insurance is in other market segments. And then also we put out guidance. One of the things we're doing as we get information is to look at what we see as the key risks, and how we think that those should be addressed in some cases based on our cybersecurity regulation, and put guidance out there for the industry.
As if right on cue, yesterday the DFS issued some guidance relating to COVID-19. What are some of the key takeaways of that guidance, and what prompted the timing of it yesterday?
Well, I think it reflects work that we have done and information that we've gained from a lot of our different partners. That includes directly from industry groups, from other government agencies and partners about what the key challenges are right now. I think this is, without a doubt, the greatest crisis that we've collectively faced, certainly in my adult life. It's really without precedent in the experience of many of us. And I think that has encompassed challenges in a lot of different areas, most importantly, of course, health and human safety. But it's also created challenges for cybersecurity. And that's the goal of the guidance, was to highlight some of the risks that we are seeing and identify what some of the problems are and some of the solutions that different organizations should consider. And it was prompted in part by the fact that we are seeing a lot of really significant challenges out there. I think a lot of people have had questions about what we're seeing and about what we're prioritizing. And so it was an effort to communicate that to the industry. I think a few of the key points in there, this won't be a surprise to anyone, but obviously the mass shift to remote working has created a lot of challenges. I mean, it happened on a speed that I don't think anyone has ever really contemplated or experienced before. Many organizations have shifted to having 10 times as many people working remotely as they used to, or something similar to that. And that's created a lot of challenges. For instance, it's created just really fundamentally a hardware challenge, right? How do you get enough devices for all those people? What's the challenge of configuring all those devices? Are you going to switch to expanding your BYOD, bring your own device policy? And how are you going to account for all the challenges that come with that? I mean, as we all know, a significant percentage of people's personal computers and phones are already compromised. So if you're going to suddenly start introducing those into your network and your work stream, you've got to have, that's another huge security challenge. In other cases, people have taken desktop machines that were originally set up to be at home and moved those, or set up to be in the office, and just had people take those home. But if you're not very careful, a computer that was configured to operate behind the protective bubble of the firewalls and the IDSs and IPSs is often much more vulnerable when it gets out there and it's connected to the internet through a person's home router. It was installed by a cable guy a few years ago. We've also seen a lot of challenges around phishing and fraud. I think it's been widely reported at this point about the increases in phishing attacks and fraud that's been associated with the COVID-19 crisis. And we'd certainly encourage companies, I get it, everyone is bandwidth constrained right now, but to the extent, as soon as you practically can, to remind employees about anti-phishing principles and even do phishing training and testing as soon as you can, I think is very important in this time, given the spike that we've seen in phishing attacks. Another problem, a lot of the frauds out there that we're seeing attacking companies and attacking consumers are based on, broadly speaking, authentication challenges, right? The way we have of knowing who we're dealing business with has really changed now that face-to-face business isn't possible anymore. And knowing who you're dealing with has become even more challenging. So I think either reminding people to adhere to the proper authentication protocols, know who they're doing business with, or adapting those protocols to our new remote working world should also be a high priority for organizations. There's more in the guidance, but those are some of the highlights, I think.
I presume the guidance is up on the DFS's website. Folks need to take a look. They can go there. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. One of the key provisions of the cybersecurity DFS regulation is on incident reporting and several key notice provisions in there. Can you just summarize what your expectations are when indeed there is an incident? When does the clock start ticking as far as you're concerned?
So there are two reportable events. An event that's reportable to DFS, there's two different kinds of events that are reportable. One is if you're reporting it to another government agency or self-regulatory body. That's one's pretty straightforward. I think most people understand that. Just by the way, it doesn't include SAR filings. You don't have to report to DFS every time you do a SAR filing. We've had to clarify that in a few cases, so I like to get that out there. And The second provision, which is a little more unusual, and I think people may not have had as much experience with, is you have to report at the DFS if there's an event that either did or had a substantial likelihood of materially harming the operations of the organization, right? And an example of that we see fairly often is ransomware attacks. Ransomware attacks often don't have, as part of the attack, an effort to steal PII, which might trigger a lot of the traditional reporting obligations that you see out there, but they can be quite devastating to an organization. So those are also reportable to DFS, and I think that's incidents like that can affect the operations or that require the company to shut down aspects of its network in order to respond to the attack are reportable to us, even if they're not reportable to another state AG's office, for instance. And then just to demystify the process a little bit, because I think what we do at DFS when we get a report is a little different from what most other government organizations do. We have a team at DFS that will typically circle back with whoever's doing the report and to gather some more information. And I think that process can go on for a while. The regulation requires organizations to report to us as promptly as possible, and certainly within 72 hours. So reports that are timely are invariably not going to be complete reports. I think that's something I want to make that clear, because I think a lot of people, they assume that when they're doing a report to the regulator, they're supposed to provide all the information. And so 72 hours, or as promptly as possible, sounds like an unreasonable time frame. And if it were true that you had to report everything, yes, it would be unreasonable, because it is extraordinarily rare to know everything you need to know about an incident, in the first couple of days. So we understand that, and we expect that there's going to be some follow-up as we go forward. Depending on the incident, the follow-up might be a few phone calls. It might go on for a few weeks or a few months while we gather information about what happened at the incident and the company's response.
Can you provide some insight, Justin, into what factors the DFS would consider before that would influence its decision to involve one of the other law enforcement partners or another regulator, either at the state, local, or federal level?
Sure. So we strongly encourage companies to report cybercrime incidents to the law enforcement. That is one of the questions that we will ask in the first follow-up call when we receive an incident report. And we find that the substantial majority of the companies by that point have already reported it to law enforcement, which I think is great. Obviously, having spent almost a decade myself in law enforcement, I think the work that's being done there to try to deter and prosecute cybercrime is really a critical component of our society's response to cybercrime. And when it hasn't been reported, we typically encourage the company to do it. So I found, and then they do. So I found in almost every case when we're dealing with a cyber incident, the company itself is the one handling the reporting to law enforcement. And I think that that makes sense. If the company is willing to do it, there's no reason for us to be an intermediary. And we want to encourage everyone to do it without being prompted as early as reasonably possible to report to law enforcement. Beyond that, there isn't necessarily a specific formula that we follow in when it's notifying either law enforcement or other regulators. It really depends on the context or the case, and it depends on the kind of issue that we're looking at. So even if you go outside of my area, which is cyber, right? If there's an angle on it, we do cases in parallel with, for instance, with your old agency, with the SEC, right? And the SEC might already be involved, or we might seek to work with them if there's an obvious securities angle to the case, or public statement to the market angle to the case. And then, as far as law enforcement goes, if anyone has been following DFS's activities for the last few years, we work closely on cases with different U.S. attorneys' offices, with Maine Justice, sometimes the Manhattan DA's office, and also very frequently with the New York AG's office. And we have strong relationships with all of those. There isn't sort of a set pattern. We don't have a list where we just start that we use every time. We start at the top and we go down. It's a function, I think, of the type of case and what we know about the interest of our partners in law enforcement and in other regulators.
We have just a few minutes left, I think, Justin, but I couldn't let you go without asking you to maybe tell us some insight that you've gained from debriefing either cooperating witnesses or criminals that have been part of investigations or prosecutions. What are some key takeaways that you've learned from them?
So one of the most fun things about being a cybercrimes prosecutor, if you're interested in this stuff, and I certainly am, is the opportunity from time to time to speak directly to the hackers themselves and to brief their interview with them and get a sense for what their perspective is and how they see what they're doing, what their priorities are, and what their best practices are. I've learned a lot from that. One of the takeaways that I like to share with people who are all in this business that we're in of working on cybercrime professionally and cybersecurity is how focused hackers often are on the defenders, i.e. us. Some of that is professional, right? If you're involved in hacking a company or an organization, you obviously take an interest in what the defenders are doing in response to your hack. But even beyond that, I think many of them are actually quite fascinated by it. I had a very skilled Russian hacker that I interviewed say that he just really enjoyed it when he had a chance to read the emails of an incident response team or a cybersecurity team or get inside what they were doing. He learned so much. He was really, fascinated by it. There's like a human nature element in it too, on top of the fact that, they're your adversaries, so it's useful to know what they're doing. InfoSec people often have administrator access, and we know getting that kind of access is a priority for attackers. One of the examples of that I've been thinking about recently, especially given the current shift to remote working, is a hacker who was dialing in to the incident response team's daily calls. And it was taking extremely detailed notes. In fact, the hacker's notes were so detailed at one point when we were reconstructing the hack, we actually used the hacker's notes because they were more detailed than what we had assembled based on the other parts of our investigation with the company. So something that I think about now that all of my work is happening through conference calls, video and telephone. And it's worth keeping in mind. I think if you were working on an incident, remember you yourself, certainly if you're an InfoSec person, but even if you're a lawyer, are actually personally a target of interest to the hackers that you're up against. So especially if you're dealing with somebody that's trying to maintain persistent access, I'd encourage everyone to keep that in mind.
I think we'll end there, Justin. Thank you so much, Justin Herring, Chief of the Cybersecurity Division of DFS, and Bruce and John as well. Thank you for the opportunity and for the moment here to interact.
Yeah, thank you, Ken. And Justin, thanks for everything you and your organization's doing at this point to help us through. Next up will be our second keynote. It's going to be a conversation with Michael Sohn from the FBI, and we'll get started with that at 1:10 p.m. Talk to you soon.